Welcome to Shifting Perspectives.
Biblical conversations about topics that matter. Let's get to it. Hey everybody, welcome back. And so we've been talking the last week and now this week about these areas of who should we idolize, who should we allow to be role models in our lives. And two things that we were going to talk about. Last week we talked about those who have been put on a pedestal and idolized, and they have since fallen and revealed sin in their life. This week I'd like for us to address a different side, maybe, of the same coin. And that are those that are doing this phrase that we call deconstructing. Maybe you can hashtag look of, ex-evangelicals is one way that it's being labeled, deconstructing. And it's basically those, if you think about constructing, right? Constructing is building something. So deconstructing is a gentler term than demolishing, right? Yes. But ultimately it's on that side. It's where you're unbuilding what's been built in regards to the faith. And there have been countless, this has become kind of really a big thing over the last 5 to 10 years of this deconstructing. And there have been some really big names, again, people that have been put on pedestals, who have come out and said, well, I've deconstructed my faith and I'm no longer a Christian. And that's what ex-evangelicals means, is I'm an ex-evangelical. I'm no longer following Christ. And this is a real struggle for a lot of people, especially you take parents like in my generation, or the purity, the purity movement that was, late 80s, early 90s, purity rings and, the abstinence contracts and all those different kinds of things. And there was a fellow by the name of Joshua Harris, got really popular really fast as a young man, who wrote a book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye, that was ultimately all about how to have a righteous relationship with a young lady in looking towards marriage. He got so popular so fast. It was just this incredible rush. And he started getting mentored by pastors. And the next thing you know, he was a young man as a mega church pastor. By mega church, I mean, 2,500 plus member mega church. And ultimately, at the end of the day, there was so much pressure from that idolization and from everybody seeing, what God maybe was doing in his life, and putting him out there. I don't know. I started pastoring pretty young. My first senior pastor position, I was 27 years old, which is pretty young.
That's young.
And it was a lot. There was a lot to navigate in that. And I wasn't pastoring a 2,500 member church. I was pastoring a 100 member church. Big difference. But ultimately, at the end of the day, shortly thereafter, he resigned from his mega church, divorced his wife, and came out and said, I don't believe any of this anymore.
Yeah.
And that was crushing for a lot of people who, really championed him as one who could help their kids navigate dating relationships responsibly and not get wrapped up into some of the things that are in the world. And that's just one example that I could give you 10 off the top of my head right now in the last decade of ones who have been from a pedestal and from a loud voice for the Christian faith to I don't even believe that anymore.
Yeah.
And for parents, if we're talking about this, or for those who maybe have caught themselves in a particular place, this is kind of harder to navigate maybe than the other, because we wrestle within ourselves of knowing I have a flesh and I'm not perfect, and I'm subject to losing the battle with sin. And I'm so grateful that the blood of Jesus covers that. But at the end of the day, how do we have conversations with somebody about the fact that somebody who was maybe a voice speaking into their life, that now all of a sudden they're not even a Christian anymore?
So it boils down to, the Bible does a great job. And that's our source of truth for everything. Right. The Bible does a great job of laying this out. In a couple sessions ago, we delved really deep into some farming analogies. And the Bible teaches us that, and it teaches us this concept through some farming analogies in the parable of the sower. So one of the things that you see is if the seed falls on the ground, it springs up and it grows really quickly. And every year, people get excited and they throw some seeds in a bowl and they put them in their house. And I can remember we did that this year, and the seeds popped up, and we got some watermelons that in 2 days had grown to 4 inches tall. Big, long, thin stem, popped up, big, and the stem can no longer support the leaves, and the leaves bend the stem over, it breaks and dies. Every one of them died.
Yep.
I
had some of them too.
They didn't have the root system. They didn't have the structure. They didn't have the capacity to stand the growth. And that's what you get a lot of times is, I don't have the capacity to stand the growth. So it becomes the heart condition of, we talked last week about some that were strong Christians, but had sin in their lives and it kind of stepped out away because of the sin, versus deconstructing now going, I was wrong. And that's a tougher one to handle.
It is,
because that's a heart condition.
Right.
Okay, why were you doing what you were doing? Were you doing what you were doing because of the faith, or because of the popularity and the publicity and all the stuff that feeds into it? You did a good job last week. We talked about pride and how that all feeds pride. And you really get two pictures here of a person that's got a heart for God can have a time of sin. We all sin, we all fall short. And the higher you are, the tougher it is to get out of the spotlight, versus saying, I don't believe it, I didn't believe it, I shouldn't have believed it. And that becomes a negative influence, and oftentimes battles the message that as Christian parents we're trying to lay out for the youth.
Right.
So, when I break it down, I look at the condition of the heart going, those actions are two different conditions of the heart. They both involve people, they both involve sin. But now what am I going to do next? So I'm going to ask you, carry that a little bit further, and in your experience, in your training, and speak into that heart condition a little bit more.
Yeah. So, and I might flip back to you, but just because I know your testimony, and maybe ask you to share a little bit about that. But over the course of the years, I can't even begin to tell you the number of people that I've led to the Lord, that have either come and prayed a prayer to receive Jesus, or made a confession of faith and were baptized. And as a pastor, I don't know what the Holy Spirit's doing in their heart.
No.
I don't know if they're responding out of emotion. I don't know if their prompting is because of the Holy Spirit, or the mom spirit, or the dad spirit, or I don't know. I have to take that on faith that God is at work in their life. And we go through a process of really talking through what does it mean to be saved. And a person can really have an intellectual understanding of what it means to be saved and never have a heart that's transformed.
Yeah.
And I think maybe if you shared for just a moment your testimony in regards to that, because that really, that ultimately at the end of the day is where it's at, is a person can look just like a Christian. And can have made a confession of faith, but never had a transformed heart. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that parable reveals some of those conditions. And there's only one out of 4 of those conditions that actually brings forth life and bears fruit. And that's the one that's had a heart transformation.
Exactly.
The rest of those, either the enemy is going to snatch the soil, or the sun is going to bake it out, or it's going to have shallow roots and it's going to have that stemmy fall over and die. I can't tell you which one that is.
Nope. Can't see it. And for those that don't know, I mean, I've been at this church my entire life. And, whenever I was 5, 6 years old, I went forward and I said the prayer, and I went to the river and I got dunked, and I was in church. I was in youth group, didn't miss. I told you guys, my mom, my dad, we had a great pastor here, in Dwayne who poured into me, as I was growing up, and just great people to be around. And if something would have happened to me and I would have died at 16, they would have all gathered around my casket and said, "Man, what a great young Christian man he was." Yeah, I did stuff that teenagers and kids do, but he was saved, he was baptized, he was part of the church, he was part of the youth group, and go on. But here's the reality of it is, I knew from about 14, 15 years old that there was something missing. and during those teenage years, those highly influential years, it was for me. I knew. I mean, I knew that I knew, but I told no one. And because now what are people going to think? I've been in church. What are people going to think now? I mean, if I'm 16, 17 years old, and all of a sudden I say I wasn't saved, then what are they going to think? And that was all the enemy speaking into me, going, just keep going the way you're going. People think you're okay. So as long as you're pleasing people, you don't have to worry about pleasing God. Just please the people.
Right.
And finally, God brought this beautiful woman in my life that I ended up marrying. And, through her spiritual walk, it caused me to reflect harder on my spiritual walk and ultimately come to I shouldn't say come to, but acknowledge the calling that was, Scott, you're not. So it wasn't until I was actually 18 years old that I actually got saved. And that time the prayer meant something. That time the baptism, there was a transformation. The stuff that I used to do, I won't say I didn't want to do anymore, but I started giving up my bad habits. I started that transition. I started studying the Bible. I started praying. I started walking. And you know what? Before then, I doubted my faith because I knew. Now, in that point in time, and from then on, I've not doubted my faith. I know.
Yeah.
I know that I know. And so from the outside, it looked the same.
Right.
From the inside, complete transformation, because the first time when I got baptized, I got wet. The second time, I won't say it saved me, but there was a true cleansing change there.
And so that the reality of that is that 18 inches.
Exactly. From here to here.
And there's a fellow by the name of Phil Vischer. I don't know if you know who he is by name, but I bet you would know who he is whenever I tell you that he was the creator of VeggieTales. Mm-hmm. And so everybody, Christian or not, everybody knows
VeggieTales.
VeggieTales is. We've got a tomato that tells stories and a cucumber that sings. How do you miss that? Mm-hmm. But Phil Vischer came out many, many years after VeggieTales, and he made a startling discovery. He said what the Lord has really revealed to me is that we've done nothing more than create moral atheists, because we've taught them Bible stories and how to be good and how to look like Christians and how to act like Christians, but we never actually addressed the heart. Mm-hmm. So up here, they've got an idea of what it looks like to be a Christian with no transformation of heart. And his language that he called that is we've done nothing more than create moral atheists, because they believe something that hasn't actually transformed them. And ultimately, at the end of the day, when you start talking about someone who deconstructed, I have to start asking the question about, what kind of soil were they to begin with? Mm-hmm. What was it that was going on at that particular time that made it to where they had all of this up here and all of that came out really well? Maybe that was natural charisma, because sometimes it is. You can find some really strong leaders just because they have natural charismatic gifts to lead. And ultimately, that's going to get them elevated to a platform. But at the end of the day, I've got to ask the question, was there ever really a heart transformation, or was this just somebody who had a intellectual knowledge and was created as a moral atheist who had charismatic giftings that caused them to be a great leader? And ultimately, I can't answer that at the end of the day. And ultimately, what I try to tell people at the end of the day is we don't put anybody on a pedestal but Jesus.
That's right.
And that's really where it comes to. It's great to have godly leaders and mentors. We want to have them. Mm-hmm. And we need to allow people to speak into our lives. I mean, Paul was very, very clear. And when I think about discipleship, and when I think about things, I talk to people and say, look, you need to have a Paul in your life. That's somebody who is a spiritual mentor who, like Timothy was to him. Timothy received from him. You need to have that in your life. You should also have somebody that's a Silas or a Barnabas. And that's a peer that you're walking with that you respect, that has the ability to speak into your life. I think of Proverbs 27. There's a couple of verses in there. One of them, talks about the wounds of a friend and the value that they are, because a friend might wound you by speaking truth, mm-hmm. but it's value because it's a wounding that's for your good versus something else. And later in that chapter, I think that's like the 4th verse, and later in that chapter, in the 19th verse, it says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens the countenance of his friend. You need to have friends in your life that can speak into your life, that you walk in relationship with. But you also, like you need a Paul, you also need a Timothy. You should have somebody that you're mentoring in your life. And the difference between somebody who's out there, who's put on a pedestal that you don't have relationship with, that is speaking into your life, is far different than the relationships that you should have that are connected relationships of someone who's speaking into your life, because those are where you're going to find safety and solace in the midst of getting it from here to here. Exactly. And transforming your life.
Exactly.
And I can personally tell you, of the relationships that I have that are this and not that, I don't know a single one that's deconstructed.
Yeah.
And that's really ultimately what ends up happening is you have a great platform and you have great charismatic gifts and you maybe have some intellectual knowledge. But that heart transformation is pretty evident when you're walking in close relationship with somebody.
Yep. The farther you are from them, the easier it is to hide things. The closer you are, the easier it is to see them. And
that's right.
And that's what you want to do is, again, going back to what we talked about last time, you want to look at each other through the lens of Christ.
That's right.
Yeah. You've got to understand everybody is a broken sinner, and you come alongside people and you help them through those times. You help them through those valleys and let them help you through yours, because that's a hard thing to do.
It is. It is. Yeah, we have to be vulnerable. And with that, I think that's really a good place to stop. Let me encourage you, throw a comment out there. Maybe you've never heard of deconstructing or evangelicals or any of this conversation. Maybe you're walking with someone, or maybe it's you that has some doubts in your own life and your own walk with God. Send us a message, send us a comment. Don't walk through those questions alone. We would love to be able to share 30 plus years of navigating difficult conversations with this man named Jesus who gave his life for you and me.
Absolutely. Let us hear from you.
We'll see you next week.